Welcome sports fans to GenX Classic Sports, where we bring the nostalgia of our sports-filled youth into the present day. Grab your favorite retro jersey, crack open a cold one, and let's stroll down memory lane together.
Welcome back, everybody, to GenX Classic Sports. I'm your host, Sean Enos, and I'm going to try to do justice to this story as best I can because it's really interesting from the NBA 1977. I don't know how many of you out there have heard of this, and I saw something about it many years ago on social media, but I had not heard about it before then, and so I knew I had to cover it here. I don't know how many of you remember Rudy Tomjanovich and Kermit Washington, but these were the two players involved in what most people just simply refer to as the punch. And this incident happened on December 9th, 1977, and it changed how the NBA handled fights and discipline going forward and into the modern game for the better, okay? If you were an NBA fan in the 70s, you knew one thing for sure. That was not the NBA that we see on TV now. You know, there was no social media, of course, and not any of the instant replay stuff, and you know, none of the pregame fashion shows and postgame podcast breakdowns like we have now. This was the NBA with remember the old polyester uniforms and the short shorts, the big mustaches, the wild hair, hard fouls, physical play, and, you know, the unspoken code, which actually was probably spoken, but one of the codes was, if you step in here, be ready to pay for it. And so, yeah, it was quite the physical game, and fighting was, you know, unfortunately, it was more common than you realize. And so the league itself was still fighting for relevance at that time in the sports scene of America. It's trying to squeeze its way in there with baseball, football, hockey, whatever, and get the ratings that it can get, you know, and the coverage that it can get. So in the midst of this battle for its reputation, it was known as being a little rough and chaotic and sometimes even out of control. So on December 9th, 1977, during what should have been just another regular season game between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Houston Rockets, the NBA crossed a line that it really never uncrossed, and it had to change the way it handled things going forward. A single punch was thrown in less than a split second, and it would nearly kill one player and nearly destroy the other one's career, and definitely destroyed the other player's reputation and permanently alter how the league thought about violence and accountability and player safety. This is the story of Rudy Tomjanovich, Kermit Washington, and the punch that changed the NBA forever. So who were these guys? Before he became a symbol of tragedy or later redemption, Rudy Tomjanovich, you probably remember him as a coach, but let me tell you about his playing career. Rudy was one of the good guys. He was considered one of the good guys by reputation in basketball. He was born in Michigan, and Rudy started at the University of Michigan from 1967 to 1970, and he was supposedly a smooth, left-handed scorer who played power forward, and he had a soft jumper, and he was one of those grinders who was a team-first kind of dude. And so he was drafted by the San Diego Rockets, second overall pick in 1970, the second overall pick in the draft. He was drafted by the San Diego Rockets, who would soon, of course, relocate to Houston, and Rudy became the heart and soul of that franchise. By the mid-70s, he had been a 5-time NBA All-Star. He was a reliable 20-point scorer. He was known league-wide as clean but tough and respected. He averaged 17 points a game and 8 rebounds a game for his career, which are great numbers. And he was a 5-time All-Star. Now, he played his whole career from 1970 to 1981 with Houston, and he wasn't known as a brawler, and he wasn't known as an enforcer type, even though he was 6'8". He was one of these 6'8", 230-pound guys, but that's not his reputation. He was the kind of player that coaches trusted and teammates loved, because of his team-friendly approach to how he played the game. He was actually known around the NBA as a peacemaker who preferred to play ball, get the fights over with, avoid them if at all possible, and get on with it and play ball. And just as important, he was the kind of player nobody expected to be in any kind of danger this night. In other words, he would not normally put himself in the middle in a negative way of something like this. And so this was a complete shocker that he was put in the kind of danger that he was that night. So who was Kermit Washington? Well, he was another big guy too. Kermit Washington was a 6'8", 230-pound forward also. This story isn't complete without talking about and understanding Kermit. He entered the league in 1973, drafted 5th overall, and he was a powerful dude. He was a 6'8" forward with enormous strength, known for his strength, and his reputation as a defensive enforcer. By 1977, Kermit, who had played for the Los Angeles Lakers the whole time, and they were filled with star power. You know who they had: Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jamal Wilkes, Norm Nixon, those guys. Kermit's role, it was a little bit different. He was praised at one point by Sports Illustrated even for his enforcer role, his intimidating nature, and his fighting skills of all things. I mean, can you imagine in today's game someone being touted as a great fighter on an NBA court? Unheard of. That would never happen. And so he was there to protect Kareem, intimidate opponents, and make sure nobody crossed the line when messing with his teammates and his superstar teammates, rather. And in the 70s NBA, that role was important. It really mattered. I can even remember in the 90s, after all this happened, there was still that role of enforcer on every team. They just didn't necessarily settle everything with their fists. But I'm talking Charles Oakley. I'm talking Dennis Rodman, those kinds of guys, Bill Laimbeer. But Washington, because of that, his reputation, he carried some baggage. He had a reputation for fighting. He had been involved in several fights in his career. And in this 1977 season that we're talking about, he had already been in a fight in the earlier part of the season. And opponents knew he had a short fuse. And in many ways, the league had historically enabled players like this. They didn't really crack down on any of this on the court enforcement stuff, and that led to all the fights and the fights themselves. They just hadn't done a whole lot about it over the years. That all changed on December 9th, 1977. So the game itself was just another NBA game on just another December night, or it should have been. It was December 9th, 1977 at the Forum, of course, the famous Forum in Inglewood, California, and the Lakers and Rockets were playing a physical game because that's how the game was played. It was emotional, nothing unusual for that era. Late in the game, though, tension started boiling over. Kevin Cunnert and our guy, Kermit Washington, they became entangled near the basket, and shoving and pushing turned into swinging, and players rushed in from all directions, and Kareem ended up, I think, tangled up with Kevin Cunnert at some point. And this is where Rudy Tomjanovich enters the story. Rudy was near midcourt, and he saw the scuffle developing, and he later said that he thought somebody might be in trouble, maybe even Kareem or another Laker, but he was sprinting towards the fight, arms pumping, head down, trying to get there as fast as he could. He wasn't angry, and he wasn't going to throw punches. He was trying to break it up and be a peacemaker, and remember, I've already told you that was sort of his reputation anyway. Now you have to look at it from Kermit Washington's perspective, okay? What happened next took less than 1 full second to develop. As Rudy approached running this little bit of a brawl that was going on, Kermit Washington saw him coming and turned, and he saw this large body charging towards him, which Rudy claimed he was charging towards, the pushing and the shoving, and Kermit could have interpreted that as, he's coming for Kareem or another one of Kermit's teammates, understandably so. In a split-second decision, when he saw Rudy charging in, he cocked his right arm and punched Rudy with everything he had, it seemed like, in a split second. and he connected with Rudy's face square below the nose, okay? And the players later said the sound that punch made, it was like a melon being dropped on the hardwood floor. And actually, if you think about it, that probably was Rudy's head hitting the floor besides the fist hitting the face. And so Rudy went down instantly. No hands up, no attempt to brace himself, no ability to brace himself or lessen his fall in any way. Straight down. And the players froze, and the crowd fell completely silent. Players later said that it was the loudest silence that they had ever experienced in an arena. The loudest silence. Think about that. And then the horror set in because Rudy laid there motionless, and he started bleeding out. Now, not to get too graphic, but you need to know the severity of what was going on. At first, many of the people thought Rudy had just simply been knocked out cold. It happens, right? But when they tried to help him up, they realized something was really, really wrong with Rudy. Tomjanovich's face had been crushed. His skull was fractured in multiple places. His jaw was shattered. His sinuses were crushed and destroyed. And most terrifying of all, and this is hard to even read out for people and tell you about, but spinal fluid was leaking from his nose into his mouth, and he could taste the spinal fluid in his own mouth. And that is normally a sign of catastrophic brain injury, okay? And despite all of this, Rudy Tomjanovich miraculously got up and walked off the court under his own power, and he almost got in a fight with Washington on the way off the court into the locker room. So he was upright and cognizant enough to know that Kermit was the one who hit him, apparently, because, like I said, he tried to get into it with him on the way off the court. The doctors later said that Rudy came dangerously close to dying right there on the court. He was rushed to the hospital in spite of walking off the court. He was rushed to the hospital, and surgeons worked for several hours to reconstruct this guy's face. And here's what he had, among other things. This is the big list of what was going on. He had broken facial bones. He had a fractured skull. He had a broken jaw, a broken nose, a severe concussion, all of which, if you roll them all together, they're life-threatening. And Tomjanovich later said that he first thought the scoreboard had fallen on him. That's how the impact felt to him. And, if you think about it, that must have been one hell of a punch. And now, if Rudy's running in one direction and Kermit spun around and hit him, I guess the running plus the perfect shot and so forth and the strength that Kermit had. Doctors who saw Tomjanovich said people with lesser injuries had certainly died in those circumstances. So this is horrible to hear about. This wasn't a basketball injury. This was a near fatal result of an assault. There's really no other way to say it. Now, despite its reputation for being a little wild and some fights happening on a normal basis, the NBA had never seen anything like this. And so television replays, they were shocking even by the 1970s standards. When they went to review the play, because it was a television broadcast, when they were reviewing the play, there was only one camera angle that really showed from the telecast. It showed the punch and a little bit of the scuffle that preceded the punch, but because that was the only footage they had, it didn't really help Washington's case very much. Because think about it, you got the scuffle happening, and then all you can see on camera is Rudy coming in and getting punched by Washington. So, not a lot of help from the video footage for Washington. Fans were horrified. The players were shaken up even that were around. And the league office really panicked, because think of the PR nightmare you would have if that happened today. And it did happen later. Remember the Malice in the Palace with the brawl with the fans, with the Pistons and I can't remember the opponent that night, but yeah, the Malice in the Palace. Similar shock value, I'm sure. At the time, the commissioner's name was Larry O'Brien, and he handed down some really swift punishment. Kermit Washington was suspended for 60 days, and it was days, not games. And so that translated to 26 games. And when you're suspended, that's suspension without pay. And on the other side, he was fined $10,000. And you think, well, that's not a whole lot of money. Well, the average NBA salary in 1977 was $35,000. I don't know what Kermit made as the sort of draft, the first round, 5th overall pick that he was, probably more than that. But that's 10%. That's $10,000 knocked off of his salary that I can't even imagine it even approached $100,000 a year. So he lost 26 games of pay, and he was fined $10,000. And I don't know what he was making, but the average player made $35,000. So the damage had been done reputation-wise for Kermit and for the NBA at that point. Kermit's reputation was destroyed overnight. He received death threats, and he received hate mail, as you would imagine. I mean, you just know that's coming. And 2 weeks later, the Lakers traded Kermit Washington to the Celtics to give the guy a fresh start. Now, from what I've read, okay, the media in Boston was very kind to him. They got to know the guy. I think Bob Ryan, who's a famous sports writer from that area, wrote for the Boston Globe. I think Bob Ryan had done a one-on-one interview with him and kind of softened the public outrage a little bit because he seemed to like the guy. And by the way, I've never said on here that he was disliked off the court. As far as I have read, everybody was fine with this guy, with Kermit Washington off the court. So he was actually embraced in that blue-collar Boston way by the fans and the media up there. But he only stayed up there one season. He ended up playing for several other teams before he retired. He actually made the All-Star game in 1980, which is a big deal in the NBA. But he ended up playing for the Clippers, Trailblazers, and Warriors after that. And his reputation, it was kind of ruined. I don't know why it didn't work out in Boston, a place that actually embraced him a little bit, why he didn't get to stay there. I don't know. But he hopped around quite a bit after that. So you can imagine what the public thought of the guy, right? Now, how about Rudy Tomjanovich? Well, Rudy's recovery was very slow and very painful, as you can imagine. He missed the remainder of that season. He had to relearn basic physical coordination, as anybody would who's undergone something like that. He had chronic headaches, emotional trauma, probably, even though I didn't read it described this way, you can probably figure he had some kind of PTSD. I guess that would be emotional trauma. He did come back. It took him 5 or 6 months to recover from this. He returned to the NBA the following season. And, he wore a protective mask. You've seen those hard plastic masks with the headband that they wear. He played 4 more seasons until 1981. And he played his whole career from 1970 until 1981 with the Rockets. But he was never quite the same physically. He never felt like he got his coordination and strength back after that like he should have. Eventually, all of it made him retire, the injuries and so forth. In 79, he sued. Well, I don't know what year he sued him, but in 1979, he was awarded a $3.3 million settlement. Well, no, he was awarded $3.3 million in damages by a federal court because he sued the Lakers, and they ended up on appeal or whatever settling before they went back to court again. They ended up settling for $2 million. So he sued the Lakers for basically letting the brawl, because it was a home game for them. It's their security, their coaches, and so forth. He sued the Lakers for letting it get out of hand, and he got $2 million out of it. Like I said, at a time when average players made $35,000, I can't imagine Rudy made it more than $100,000. So that was a chunk of change for sure. And so how did this change the NBA? Well, it forced the NBA to grow up and deal with all of this. The league realized that it really could not treat violence as entertainment anymore. It couldn't allow these enforcer types to operate completely unchecked. And it couldn't ignore player safety. I mean, that's the main thing. And in the years that followed, David Stern, who later became the famous NBA commissioner during the Jordan, Magic, Bird, all that era. David Stern was the chief legal counsel at that time for the NBA. And so he and other NBA officials, they got together and decided that the on-court fights were way too common and too brutal. And so he tightened all the rules against fighting. In the years that followed, suspensions became harsher. Bench clearing brawls were more aggressively penalized for the participants in the fight itself, plus the people leaving the bench. And the league worked hard to clean up its image. And, I keep thinking how lucky the NBA was that within a couple of years of this is when Magic and Larry Bird hit the league and kind of transformed it to new heights. So that was kind of good timing. It only took a couple of years for people to move on and have two new superstars to really take it to the next level. But this paved the road towards the modern NBA being able to crack down on this kind of stuff. And so without December 9th, 1977, you don't get the type of, I don't remember the numbers, but the suspensions after the Malice at the Palace brawl all those years later were tremendous. I mean, they really, really cracked down on those guys. There were clearer rules on fighting and leaving the bench for fights and so forth. Heck, even the intentional fouls, even that stuff has cracked down over the years, so guys don't get hurt just driving to the basket. And so the emphasis on player safety that we see today, it actually grew out of what happened in 1977 for sure. So let's talk a bit about the legacy and maybe even the redemption of some of this. Rudy Tomjanovich eventually found his redemption unexpectedly as a coach, really. He was the head coach of the Houston Rockets from 1992 to 2003, and he led the Rockets to back-to-back NBA championships in 1994 and 1995. Remember when Jordan retired the first time, Olajuwon and company won back-to-back titles. And after winning that first title, he's delivered one of the more interesting sports quotes, or he's credited with giving one of the more interesting sports quotes of all time when he said, don't ever underestimate the heart of a champion. That was Rudy Tomjanovich who said that. Now, for Kermit Washington, the story was a lot more difficult. He spent years trying to explain that he never intended to hurt Rudy that badly. He had expressed remorse, but that moment defined him forever, really. And the two lives, of course, were changed in that instance. And one punch, despite the controversy, he did manage to play for those other different teams until 1982. But, he was just never the same on the court. And, of course, his reputation obviously was changed. Kermit Washington apologized to Tomjanovich. In case you're wondering, yes, Washington apologized many, many times over the years. And Tomjanovich always saying that he forgave him. Okay, so in case you're wondering if they ever got together or ever talked about it or whatever you're thinking, yes, they have definitely. As a matter of fact, in one interview I read, both men described their relationship as becoming friends. Now, it took a while. This didn't happen the next year. We're talking, I believe it was a couple of decades before they really started talking to each other about it and moving on. And I'll tell you a little bit about the moving on right here. And if you were wondering, yes, they've given a few interviews over the years about it. Not a lot, but some. Rudy, I found, was quoted in one interview as saying that being a victim is just self-destructive. I believe hatred and resentment, it's like taking poison. I chose to sincerely forgive. And so that was Rudy's eventual. Now, obviously neither of them will ever forget it. You can't forget something like that. But Rudy chose to forgive and to move on. And the two participated and by participating, I don't know if that means they granted interviews or read an advance copy or what, but they participated in a book that tells this whole story and talks about their lives and stuff. And it was a book by noted sports writer John Feinstein, and it was called The Punch. And in the process of reviewing that book and whatever their involvement was with it, they got to talking. And this was on into the 80s, I believe, maybe even the 90s. But yes, they developed a relationship, and as both men, like I told you, said, they described each other as friends. So that's good to hear. So for Gen X fans, this moment isn't just about history. It's a reminder of how different sports really were back then. I mean, you can look at it from the aspect of how the NFL used to let the defenders just maul the quarterbacks as they were throwing the ball. That's one difference over the years you've seen. The fighting in the NBA for this, same kind of deal. And it also reminds you of how fragile careers and lives can be. Honestly, this could have killed Rudy. It really could have killed him. And of course, what we know about sports a lot over the years is that one moment can change everything. So December 9th, 1977, it wasn't just a bad night in NBA history. It was a turning point and a moment when the league and all of us fans realized that this was a big moment, and it was bigger than basketball, the game itself. And that's why 50 years later, we still remember the punch that changed the NBA forever. And that is the story of Rudy Tomjanovich and Kermit Washington and the punch that happened on December 9th, 1977 between the Houston Rockets, Los Angeles Lakers there, and the famous Forum in Los Angeles. And I hope you appreciate that story, and that's going way back for Gen Xers. Some remember this and some won't, but hey, I read into it and thought it was really interesting, and definitely changed a lot of lives, that incident. So if you enjoy what I did today and you want to hear more, just let us know with a comment, let us know with a like. You can find us easily on social media and through the apps that you use to listen to us. So I appreciate you giving me 28 or 30 minutes of your time here today, and we'll be back with some more basketball in a week.
Thank you for joining us on GenX Classic Sports, where nostalgia meets the thrill of the game. Tune in next time for more insightful discussions and memorable moments, brought to you by Pine Street Productions. Until then, stay passionate about sports and keep the memories alive.